All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Benjamin Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers here in Saskatoon. This event is being held on Treaty 6 territory, which is the land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. As we listen to our speakers share their words today, may we recognize the Indigenous stories that have been shared on this land since time immemorial. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of The Laundryman by Dwayne Brenna, hosted by Ed Willett and featuring Josiah Nelson as a guest reader. Thank you so much to all of them for being here this evening and for working with us to make this event happen. Just a note that this event is being live streamed, so please be aware of the webcam off to our right. I'd also like to take this time to encourage you to silence your phones for the duration of the event. I just heard an "oh" from behind me. If you would like to buy copies of The Laundryman, we have some up here on the signing table behind me, as well as on the desk by where you first walked in. You're welcome to get a book signed before you purchase it. Just please also make sure to purchase it on the way out. It's very hard to sell a book with someone else's name in it. So a little bit about our presenters today. Josiah Nelson holds an MFA from the University of Saskatchewan, where he occasionally teaches creative writing. His work has appeared in various literary journals, including Brick, CV2, Grain, the Literary Review of Canada, Queen's Quarterly, and The Rumpus. His debut book is forthcoming with Invisible Publishing. Over a professional writing career spanning 3 decades, publisher and editor Edward Willett has worked with publishers of all types and sizes, from the very small to major publishers like McGraw-Hill and DAW Books. Dwayne Brenna is the award-winning author of 8 books of fiction and nonfiction and 2 books of poetry. Everyone, please give them all a warm welcome.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming tonight. You may be wondering why I'm here. This is not my book that we're launching, but in a way it is, because I am the publisher of Shadowpaw Press, which has published The Laundryman. And so I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Shadowpaw Press. First of all, the name comes from our black Siberian cat, Shadowpaw, who, as we were discussing just a little bit ago, has a publishing history. His uncle belonged to my New York publisher, Betsy Wollheim. So that's why it's called Shadowpaw, and that's why when you buy the book, you will get a picture of our cat for nothing extras right there on the book. So I should also add that even though he's a literal figurehead, and he is absolutely no help at all in the actual publishing process. So Shadowpaw Press started in 2018. I started it because I wanted to publish a couple of books that I had. I had a collection of short stories I wanted to publish, and my grandfather-in-law's First World War memoirs. And those came out, and then for a while it was just, some books of mine that I'd gotten the rights back to, and I brought them out. But somehow it grew some from there. And 2 years ago, I put out 20 books in 1 year, which is a lot for one person and a non-helpful cat. And I published quite a few Saskatoon authors, and some of them are here. Dave Carpenter is here, and of course, Dwayne. I shouldn't start listing Saskatoon authors, but there's several. Heather Richards, Art Slade, you may have heard of him. Anyway, I've actually published more Saskatoon authors than I have Regina authors, which is cool, I guess. And I'm very proud to be able to publish the quality of authors, Saskatchewan authors, that I have been able to publish. I am very small, but I do have proper national distribution and all that good stuff. Member of Literary Press Group. I am a certified Canadian publisher from the Association of Canadian Publishers. And as I said, I'm probably the only publisher in Canada who has a cat on every book. So that's what sets me apart, I guess. So we're going to have, of course, a reading from Dwayne from The Laundryman, and he'll tell you more about the book at that time. And I'll give you a more detailed introduction to Dwayne. But we will start with Josiah, who was just introduced to you. He said exactly what I was going to say in the introduction, so I won't repeat that. But Josiah, who is a former student of Dwayne's, and has a collection of short stories coming out very soon, is going to read to you first. So, Josiah.
Thank you very much, Ed, and thanks to Dwayne as well. It's a real pleasure to be here. I took 1 class with Dwayne, super helpful. Yeah, very good feedback, and it's a real pleasure to be here to read a couple stories. I'm going to read 2 very short stories that are coming from this forthcoming book. The first one's called Hair, Teeth. They came to town, one riding a lawnmower, the other carrying a leaf blower. their hair shorn tight and crisp like hedges, and their teeth white, too white, so white they were blue. Flashed those teeth at everyone they passed as they wandered around our town. When our mayor Archibald saw them, he nodded and walked them to our only auditorium. The one rode onto stage on his lawnmower, the other carrying his leaf blower. Archibald shook their pale hands and said, "I have an announcement to make. They're taking it from here." At first, that didn't seem so bad. The one just mowed the grass at our parks and fields, while the other followed him, spraying around leaves and mulch. We weren't wary enough of their stiff, sharp hair, their ice blue teeth, the way that lawnmower gobbled things, the way they never stopped working. Gordon said he'd been walking his dog at 3 a.m. and saw them at Mrs. Thiessen's, the one whirring around on his lawnmower, the other blowing debris out of her eaves. Said their eyes were white like flashlights. Said he could see them grinning. In no time, they cleaned up our town, the whole thing, even our yards. But then things went missing. Houses vanished one by one, and cars and parks and buildings and streets and people. One day they knocked on my door and said, "We're taking it from here." Before I could reply, the one on the lawnmower smashed through my door and proceeded to ride through my living room, colliding with my couch and bonking over my table, spraying bits of wood around the room like confetti. He kept riding, soon bashing through my rear wall and turning back around. The one with the leaf blower followed him, shooting air at the drywall and dust, causing the detritus to swirl and spin, and then, without notice, disappeared. I raised a finger to the one on the lawnmower as he crashed back and forth through my house, like I wanted a word, but he just flashed that smile, clean and clear like a burst of light. And the next thing I knew, I was standing in front of these colorful curved things, these technicolored turtle shells, tents, rows and rows of tents, each with a little head peeking out of it. And right next to me, in front of the first row of tents, a sign. It said, "Here." I turned around and saw our town. West of Maine looked as it always had. But east of Maine looked barren, erased. In the distance, I saw the lawnmower crashing into a car, buzzing right through it like a saw, and the leaf blower flinging the shards of metal into the ether. As I picked my way through the tents, looking for an empty one, I saw Gordon, I saw Mrs. Thiessen, I even saw our town's mayor, Archibald. When I passed him, he said, "They're taking it from here," and everyone nodded. Over the next 14 days, I watched from my tent as the two figures broke down and blew away the rest of our houses and cars, playgrounds and trees, raising everything like they were giving the town a perfect buzz cut. And as they did, people wandered into the tent village and slipped into empty tents. To each person, Archibald said, "They're taking it from here," and we all nodded. Lately, though, there have been no newcomers, no one to say these words to. We're all here. And yet Archibald can't help himself. He still says them. Actually, he screams them. Sometimes at night with my head poking out of my tent like a gopher, watching as the two figures shear and dust the already desolate landscape of our former town, I hear Archibald scream out in his sleep, "They're taking it from here!" Recently, right after he screams, I've peeled my head back into my tent and whispered, "They'll take it from here." Sometimes even twice. "They'll take it from here." I like the shape of the words in my mouth, the way they taste off my tongue. I don't think they'll ever stop working. Thanks. This next one's called This Mysterious Ache. It was just published in Brick in December. Mordecai T. Gallagher is a third-year anthropology student at McGill. He's interested in folklore, ethnography, and archaeological method. He writes creative nonfiction on the side just for fun. Sun and Sunning is his first published piece. A postdoctoral fellow at the University of Victoria, Mordecai T. Gallagher holds a PhD from Dalhousie, where his dissertation attempted to develop a methodology for exploratory ethnography based in Levinasian ethics. He used this method to conduct an ethnography of hobbyist cryptozoologists in Atlantic Canada. His dissertation was runner-up for the Council of Graduate Schools ProQuest Distinguished Dissertation Award. His essays have appeared in several Canadian literary journals. He and his wife live in Victoria with their terrier, Tony. Mordecai Gallagher is a Leverhulme Trust Fellow at the University of Bristol in the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology. His project attempts to use Levinas's concept of the other to inform ethnographic methodology in the context of the cryptozoology community, connected to sightings around Glastonbury Tor. His creative nonfiction has appeared in many literary journals in North America and beyond. Although located in Bristol for the academic year, he calls Victoria, Canada, where his wife and 2 children live, home. Mordecai Gallagher is a lecturer in anthropology at Glasgow Caledonian University. The research he's been working on for over a decade, which actually emerged from his PhD dissertation, now a historical document itself, is an experimental ethnographic account of magical activity in the United Kingdom that blends interview, reportage, and personal experience. He currently serves as vice chair of Glasgow's chapter of hobbyist cryptozoologists. His writing has been published widely. A father of 2, Gallagher regularly travels to England and Canada. Mordecai Gallagher is a researcher and writer based in Scotland. For the past several decades, he's been working on an experimental autoethnography describing the experiences of those, including himself, who have seen or interacted with mythological beings or activity across the United Kingdom. Once interested in disseminating this research via academic venues, Gallagher now uses the personal essay as the primary vehicle to share the findings of his work and has begun compiling and conceptualizing his debut essay collection to properly do so. Lately, he's been investigating magical portals and, to this end, finds himself frequently returning to Glastonbury Tor in England and Doonhill in Scotland. Despite many efforts, he has yet to cross the Veil. He lives in Perthshire, Scotland, in a cabin he built with his own hands. Mordecai Gallagher is a writer and researcher based in Scotland. His research, a lifelong project, has investigated and indexed mythological and magical beings and activity across the United Kingdom. Initially a work of community-based research and ethnography, Gallagher's research shifted toward autoethnography in order to include his own sightings of animate stones, cave fairies, bodach, and others. His reported sighting of a cave fairy in Schiehallion was recently approved by the International Society of Cryptozoology. Gallagher's essays, which he's organizing into a collection, describe these events and experiences. His research has led him to the Isle of Skye, where, for the past several years, he's been investigating a possible portal near the Fairy Glen. Steady observation has confirmed many of his intuitions. He lives in Scottish wilderness, close to the Fairy Glen, where he watches and waits, where he looks toward the horizon. Much could be said about Mordecai Gallagher, academic, anthropologist, writer, explorer, hermit. Originally a professor in anthropology with an interest in ethnographic methodology and Levinasian ethics, Gallagher became increasingly preoccupied with the wide cast of figures in English and Scottish folklore and mythology, which motivated him to move from Canada to the United Kingdom. Over the span of his career, he transitioned away from the academy and into the field, where his research shifted from exploratory ethnography into something stranger, more personal, a style of autoethnography all his own. In time, he bent this style exclusively to personal essays, which weave interview, reportage, and personal experience to offer a kaleidoscopic and startlingly vivid account of encounters with mythological figures and places. It is no surprise his essays have been published widely and to notable acclaim. In the final years of his research, Gallagher turned his attention to the possible existence of magical portals, which he saw as the pinnacle of all his investigation. He relentlessly researched and observed Glastonbury Tor, Dune Hill, and other locations, before settling in the wilderness of Skye near the Fairy Glen, where he lived for an unknown period of time. Roughly 8 years ago, he went missing and, after 7 years of searching, was pronounced dead. Freepine Press is honored to publish Mordecai Gallagher's debut collection of essays, This Mysterious Ache, posthumously. Thanks.
Thank you, Josiah. That's right up my alley, that stuff. So. Now we will turn to the gentleman to my left, Dwayne Brenna, and this is The Laundryman. This is the book in question. He will tell you more about how it came to be and about it, but I will give you a little more detail on Dwayne, which is fortunately written in the back of the book, which is very helpful. Dwayne Brenna is the award-winning author of several books of humor, poetry, and fiction. Cotteau Books, the late great Cotteau Books. They were my publisher too. Published his popular series of humorous vignettes, Eddie Gustafson's Guide to Christmas in 2000. His 2 books of poetry, Stealing Home and Give My Love to Rose, were published by Helios Press in 2012 and 2015. Stealing Home, a poetic celebration of the game of baseball, was shortlisted for several Saskatchewan Book Awards, including the University of Regina Book of the Year Award. His first novel, New Albion, about a laudanum-addicted playwright struggling to survive in London's East End during the winter of 1850-51, was published by Cotteau in 2016 and won the 2017 Muslims for Peace and Justice Fiction Award at the Saskatchewan Book Awards, and was one of 3 English-language novels shortlisted for the prestigious M.M. Bennett's Award for Historical Fiction. His baseball novel, Long Way Home, was published by Corporal Press in 2022, and his theater history text, Nights That Shook the Stage from McFarland Books, came out in 2023. His short stories and poems have been published in an array of journals, including Grain, Nine, Spitball, the Antigonish Review, Intima, and the Cold Mountain Review, and his short story collection, Theories of Everything, came out from Shadowpaw Press in 2025, and you can see some of Theories of Everything over there as well, at least a couple of copies. So, Dwayne, you're up.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed, and thank you all for being here. And thank you, Josiah. Josiah has such a finely observed view of human nature and of the world, and such a lyrical way of telling. I can honestly say I taught him nothing. He was this good when I met him. And he's got a book coming out. It's Invisible Press.
That's right.
Coming out next in May 2027. Yeah. So hopefully there'll be something here to celebrate that, and I'll definitely be here to watch it. I'd like to thank a few people. Shadowpaw Press and Ed, who's here for his countless hours that he spent editing this book. I'm indebted as well to Mark Eisenzimmer, who's a former police detective and who is a current screenwriter, for giving me a lot of information about police procedure, even though this is police procedure in 1883. Special thanks to Ronald Gerber, literary agent with Lowenstein Associates in New York, who took the time to read the early draft of this book and to give me some really good feedback. And also a special thank you to my wife, who had to listen to me read her every chapter of this book one by one. And then at the end of it all, she read it again and gave me some very good, helpful hints. So yeah, thank you to her, and thank you to you all for coming here. Thank you, Benjamin, by the way, for organizing this. So without further ado, I'll try to transport you back to the year 1883, when two Mounties, Belvedere and Montgomery, ride toward Prince Albert's settlement to solve the murder of a laundryman. We'd been riding for half a day, and I don't believe I'd heard Belvedere utter one word. He sat on his roan like a lump, cradling his terrier in front of the saddle horn as the October sun began to wane. I wondered if the terrier even had a name. Sometimes Belvedere would let it run in the tall grass as we traced our way along the banks of the North Saskatchewan River. When he wanted the terrier to keep up, he would whistle high and urgently, the kind of whistle you might expect as a cat call in some Eastern theater. Our horses trudged together side by side in the deep wheel ruts of the Traders' Road. Belvedere was no picnic, and neither was the assignment that Colonel Herchmer had given us. He briefed us 2 days earlier in Battleford. There had been a murder in Prince Albert, a town of 2,000 souls 3 days east. A laundryman had been gunned down in his own backyard. The town's sheriff had done due diligence, but no perpetrator had been found. The local garrison of the mounted police was at odds with the sheriff's office and had never dealt with a murder before. I know it's not the most glamorous assignment, Herchmer had said, sitting smugly at his desk at the officers' quarters, but I'm sure you'll make the best of it. I couldn't help but feel that the assignment was some sort of a punishment, at least for Belvedere, who never bothered to demonstrate much admiration for authority. There had been a rumor about a fiasco at Fort Walsh some years before, and he was often given assignments that nobody else wanted, at least for as long as I'd known him. There's currently no medical man at the garrison in Prince Albert, Herchmer added, not bothering to look at me while he stuffed tobacco into his meerschaum. We'll need you there, Montgomery, to examine the body. How long has the man been dead, sir? I asked. The colonel rubbed his chin. At least a week, he said. Took 3 days for the rider to get here. Then there might not be much left to examine. When Herchmer finally looked at me, it was a gaze of unhappiness at being questioned by an underling. Well, examine what you can. He handed me an envelope containing private orders that were meant to be kept confidential. We'd been told to keep an eye out for a farmstead 30 miles downriver, where we might find food and shelter on the first night of our trek. The sky had been overcast since mid-morning. I was glad of my riding boots and woolen socks, glad of the muskrat hat and the thick leather gloves. The wind came out of the north, not a good thing I had learned in the few short months since I joined the force. Cold weather emanates from the tundra and the Arctic wastes above it and grips the open prairie in its steely hand. My feet grew numb as the wind blew in. Fastening the buttons on my heavy buffalo coat as I rode with one hand and fingers that felt like sticks of wood was an awkward procedure. I found myself looking over my shoulder like a man hunted by a wild animal as a darker set of clouds clambered toward us. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon by my pocket watch, and still no sign of the promised farmstead. Belvedere grew increasingly more sullen, if that was possible, his eyes like blackened marbles. He nudged his horse in the flank when it stopped to munch the tall, dead grass. The dog inside his bulky buffalo coat was every bit as silent as Belvedere. Maybe it was asleep. Snow began to fall. A smattering at first. You wouldn't have known anything was out of the ordinary by the blank look on Belvedere's face. He kept riding, oblivious to the changing weather. The wind grew more intense, hoodoos of snow swirling around us. Soon, I could not see 100 feet ahead of us. I counted on our horses to follow the trail, although as far as I knew, the beasts had never traveled that road before. The whiteness in the air around us was something like what it is in my imagination to die. A vast nothingness, no coordinates, no here and no there, a swirling whiteness like the maelstrom of creation and destruction. I had packed enough food in my saddlebag for a 3-day journey, or so I thought, mostly hardtack and jerky and some bread, but also a puckered apple that I had managed to liberate from the mess hall before leaving. Whether out of hunger or fear, I found myself devouring most of that on the first day, even gnawing at the desiccated apple that had frozen like a rock during the afternoon. Belvedere ate in a more conservative fashion, allowing himself a morsel of jerky now and then, and providing his dog with the same ration. Then it got dark. Our horses lost the trail, and we found ourselves lurching over rocks and undergrowth. Perhaps we should set up camp, I shouted, competing with the wind. We'll stay the course, Belvedere snarled. His mustache and his goatee were caked with wet snow. He tucked his chin lower into his buffalo coat like a helmsman sailing into a gale. I couldn't argue with him. A corporal with 5 years' service under his belt, he had much more experience of the territories than I. Still in my first months of my contract with Her Majesty the Queen, I outranked him only by virtue of my medical degree. I had been hired as a commissioned officer, but rank means nothing in the face of a prairie blizzard. My horse Belle trudged bravely into the storm. The wind bit at my face, it chewed on my earlobes and searched out the fingers inside my gloves. Luckily, I'd remembered to stow a woolen scarf, a parting gift from Emily, in one of my coat sleeves. That scarf was my talisman. It protected me in the same way that a gift from his damsel shielded a knight-errant in olden times. Clenching the reins in my teeth, I wrapped the warm scarf over my nose and mouth. We rode doggedly. The horse's pace had slowed to a crawl, and the only other comfort I had was the cold metal compass that assured me we were heading in a northeasterly direction. There were no stars in the whitened sky, no moon to steer by. Little more than a block of ice before long, I was ready to tumble out of the saddle, find my eternal rest in the first snow of the prairie autumn. Belvedere did not acknowledge the cold. He spurred his horse into it, kicking the tired animal in the flank if it balked or expressed any kind of unwillingness. The corporal's jaw was set, and his hooded eyes peered fiercely into the storm. Faintly at first, and then a trifle more clearly through the blizzard, a light appeared. Cold and tattered as I was, I could have been hallucinating. Then a rough-hewn farmstead with a few squat buildings materialized out of the darkness. The light I had seen was a coal oil lantern blazing in the greasy window of a log shack. We were glad of any warmth and shelter, and I held the horse's reins while Belvedere knocked at the door with a gloved hand. A sturdy-looking young man opened it. He had a Winchester rifle in his hands, clutching it tight in front of his chest as he spat some words in French and Cree at Belvedere. "Are you McCollum?" I heard Belvedere shout over the wind. "La Frenière de Chenacanachawn." "We are officers of the Northwest Mounted Police," Belvedere declared. "We require shelter for the night." conversation went back and forth for a few minutes while I stood in the cold, shivering. The horses were shivering too. It was clear that the young farmer did not trust us, but it would have been unconscionable for him to send us out again into the blizzard. He spoke partly in French, but it did not sound like the language of romance. When the negotiation ended, he reluctantly donned a thick cloth coat and escorted us out to the barn, where we stabled our horses and fed them alongside a few wizened cattle and 3 cats that huddled near the cows for warmth. Then we went back to the house. It was a one-room shack with a stove and a table at one end and a bed at the other. Hides of beaver, fox, and muskrat were stretched on frames and hung from the ceiling on long hooks. Hanging on the wall near the rough bed was a silver necklace that seemed out of place with the rest of the decor. It was perhaps evidence of a wife who had succumbed to the pox or some such illness in previous years. The young farmer studied us as we huddled over the stove for the better part of an hour. He was still sitting in a homemade chair at the table as we arranged our bedrolls on the wooden floorboards. Belvedere draped his tunic over a chair and fed his dog another morsel of jerky. When it was time to sleep, he rested on one arm on his bedroll, studying the farmer at the same time as the farmer was studying him. Then he pulled the buffalo coat over himself and closed his eyes. I wondered if we might be murdered in our sleep, but I took some comfort in the fact that Belvedere had left his holster with the Enfield revolver at the ready near to his right hand. He slept with the little terrier pressed against his back. After some time, the farmer leaned his rifle against a wall and replenished the stove with wood. Seeming to give up on his animosity, he extinguished the flame in the lamp and lay down on the straw mattress of the bed, his back propped against the drafty wall. I can't remember which of us went to sleep first. When I awoke the next morning, the young farmer was again sitting at his rough-hewn table. He was wearing woolen trousers and a thick corduroy shirt. His feet were clad in beaded moccasins. The rifle was cradled in his arms. The log house smelled of brain tanning, and the smoky, meaty smell made me hungry. The stove was still hot and crackling, but there was nothing cooking on its French plate or in the oven, no porridge, not even a pot of coffee. I sat up on my bedroll and poked Belvedere gently. The terrier was already awake and growling softly, his alert eyes trained on the farmer. Belvedere's hand was still wrapped firmly around the Enfield. He sat up and looked warily about. "Have you anything for us to eat?" he asked the farmer. "Eat?" the farmer said. Belvedere rubbed the stubble of his chin. "Manger." "Mange," the farmer repeated. "No." "We need sustenance," Belvedere said. The farmer pointed toward the door with his rifle. "Shipway tay." I looked to Belvedere for guidance. What does shipway tay mean? "Means there is no breakfast here," Belvedere said. "He wants us to go away." The morning was cold and crisp and clear as we walked toward the barn. Scattered on the thin layer of snow were a few yellow aspen leaves that might have decorated branches the day before. The sky was again clear and the sun so bright that it almost hurt the eyes. I turned and looked toward the river and saw that the land had been cleared in a thin finger abutting against the water. Unlatching the barn door, the young farmer watched closely, rifle still in hand, as we entered the building. Our horses, at least, looked well fed and replenished. They grunted and farted in their stalls. the breath from their nostrils visible in the morning air. When the horses were saddled and ready, Belvedere opened his saddlebag and produced a piece of jerky about the size of my wallet. Offering none to me, he fed a portion to the little dog and put the rest in his own mouth. If this witty fellow can't be bothered to feed us, he said, we'll have to make do with our own provisions. I began to lament my own stupidity at having packed so little sustenance before leaving Battleford. We mounted our horses outside the barn. The farmer latched the door again and stood in front of the building as though he were a sentry left there to guard his last remaining possession. Sitting tall in the saddle, Belvedere stared at the man with a cold, dark eye. You, my friend, are a scholar and a gentleman. The farmer showed no sign of understanding. Fingering the trigger of his Winchester, he pointed with his lips toward the east. Shipway Tay, he said again, and we spurred our animals out of his domain. We headed northward on the Traders' Road. The sun was still low on the horizon, and we had to be careful to steer our horses through the soft snow of the wheel ruts and not up into the uneven grass. Belvedere kept the terrier sequestered inside his coat, feeding it a scrap of jerky now and then. I was powerfully hungry, but I did not want to admit to the corporal that I had lacked the foresight to slide more than a small packet of unperishable food into my saddlebag. It was clear that we had failed to find the McCollum farm the night before, or that we had somehow overshot it. Not a very pleasant fellow, that Lafreniere, I said, as my horse picked its way along the trail. Belvedere shot me a desultory glance. The Brûlés-Bois don't love us. Oh, I asked, why's that? They know we've come to take their land. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. And I should mention, now that you've listened to that, I don't know if I should mention this in a print bookshop or not, but there is an audiobook version of The Laundryman read by Dwayne Brenna. And you can find that wherever you get audiobooks, Audible and all those good places. You can even buy it directly from the Shadowpaw Press website, shadowpawpress.com. You can download it directly from there. So we are going to take questions. How is this going to work?
I can run the microphone to people. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand. I'll run the microphone to you, and then
You'll have to come up and talk into the microphone to answer the question.
we can take the microphone off the stand.
You can take them on. Wow. Things we can do with modern technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, any questions for Josiah, for Dwayne, or I guess for me?
Dwayne, I've read a lot of your work set in the 19th century and the 20th century, and set in England and north of Saskatoon, and I because your imagination travels to a great many places. I often wonder. I've often wanted to ask you, what was the seed of this current novel? What was there something that recurred in your mind that brought you back to this story?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Dave. I failed to mention my writers group, of which Dave Carpenter is one member. These guys have seen every chapter of my first draft and had a lot to do with it getting published. So, and going to that writers group is like a trip to the McDowell colony. It's like, Hemingway in one cabin and Alice Munro in another. And, it's just a wonderful thing. Thornton Wilder in the third. The seed. I didn't. I wanted to write an 1800s story about Mounties. And I didn't realize it until I was working on the novel that my grandfather had been born in 1884. And I had the, unbelievable as it sounds, I had the joy of working with my grandfather on the family farm until I was 15 years old, I guess, when he passed away. He was an old Norwegian who arrived here in 1905, but he was born in 1884, and I started to realize that I wanted to explore the world that he was born into and how different that world is from ours. English was not his first language, and in fact, I think he viewed English as the language of the oppressor. He told me he was strapped on the school grounds in North Dakota for speaking English, or for speaking Norwegian rather, on the school grounds. And so I'm not sure what he'd think of me writing a novel in English, or having done 2 English degrees at the University of Saskatchewan. But I'm making up for it now. I'm learning Norwegian on Duolingo. But I think that, I think in some subconscious way, I think that was the seed of the thing.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about your research process, and where you looked and what you learned that you didn't use?
Yeah, I mean, I think, anybody who writes anything has to ask himself if he's the best person to write that particular story. And it took me a while to feel like I might be the right person to write this story. But I did a lot of research. One of the best things I found was an old thesis, an old University of Saskatchewan thesis, probably written in about 1965. And it was a history of Prince Albert from 1870 to 1910. And it was just a beautiful piece of work. And I can't exaggerate how much information I took from that and put directly into the book. And of course, there was a lot of stuff I didn't know about Mounties. And so I spent a lot of time working on that as well. Mostly through reading books, but also, visiting the police jail that's still standing there in Prince Albert. There's not much more of the Mountie barracks from Prince Albert's that's still standing, but that's still there. I did a tour of course, Battleford, where these guys come from, and the fort there, which is very informative as well. Just kind of fills you with historical detail. When you write a historical novel, it should be fairly historically accurate. There are some things in the novel probably that are not quite spot on, sometimes by choice and sometimes not. But my theory of writing historical fiction is that the fiction side is the most important, and if history encroaches too much, it gets a little tedious for the reader. So that's the way I proceeded with this book.
I have a question for Josiah. I really liked the weirdness in your stories, and I'm wondering if you
Thank
could
you.
talk a little bit about the influences that made you choose to go beyond the barriers of reality and explore speculative fiction technique in your fiction.
Right. Yeah, thanks for that. The weirdness. I love that. I think you are what you eat. And I think I like to read a lot of stuff like that. I really like George Saunders, Karen Russell, Gogol, Kafka, just people who seem like they're on a different wavelength and sort of what's on the table. Is anything seemingly. So I think just reading and observing that it's been done before, people seem to like it, and it seems to flow naturally from me. I felt like I had the green light, so I just went for it. Yeah, thanks.
So I've heard a rumor that you're working on a sequel. Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, I am working on a sequel. Nobody's promised to publish that just yet, so I'll put that out there right now. But it's Belvedere and Montgomery make a resurgence in this sequel in 1886 after the rebellion, and they end up in a place called the Wolverine Creek, and that's the tentative title of the sequel. Wolverine Creek is a real place. It exists. It's right by Humboldt, Saskatchewan. It's the place where Middleton and his men assembled before they mounted their assault during the Red River Resistance. It's the place where Chief Whitecap was kept prisoner during that time as well. You can still go out there. There's not much there anymore, but there are these frame buildings made out of metal that show you the telegraph station that was there. And that telegraph station would have relayed messages all the way back to Toronto and Montreal at the time. The telegraph didn't go, it wasn't even in PA in 1883 when this first novel is set, but it got there by the time of the rebellion. So yeah, that's where the sequel is set. Whereas The Laundryman is a winter's tale. It's told in the winter. We get a snowstorm in the very first chapter, and everything is ice and snow after that. The sequel is set in summer, and the characters deal with mosquitoes.
Question. I don't, Mike, Wayne, how'd you come up with the name of Belvedere? Because whenever I hear Belvedere, I think of a butler or a postman. Can you explain how you came up with that?
I can't. It's just like the name. I don't know. I wanted.
Belvedere doesn't. I don't. When I hear the word Belvedere, I don't think of the real Canadian.
Yeah, I wanted a sense of well, not royalty, but a sense of a guy who might have been educated at Eton, who comes out to the territories and turns out to be a mean man for reasons that you'll find out in the book, but no real other thought behind the name than that.
Hi, Dwayne. I'm wondering what, because I grew up around Prince Albert, but I'm wondering about the history of the railway there. Was there a railway in the 1880s? And did that play a role in what the mounted police did?
Yeah. It came there in the 1880s, or well, it was supposed to be. This is central to the plot of the novel. Actually, it was going to be the main line from Winnipeg through PA and on to Edmonton and then Whitehorse and so forth. And Prince Albert had every right to think that they would be given that line. It was a much more major center at the time than Regina, or even Fort Qu'Appelle, which is, I think, was a more major center. So much of the novel has to do with speculation as to when that railroad will arrive and will it go on to Edmonton and so forth. And then, of course, in the early 1880s, Mr. Dewdney decided that it would be better if the railroad went through Regina. I think largely because he had land there that he could speculate upon. And so that's where it went. But yeah, the railroad does feature strongly in the thing. And had it gone another way, you know, Prince Albert would be, I think, a much more, a much bigger center than it is now. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
We have enough time for maybe one or two more. Perfect.
I enjoyed both readings, and I'll ask Dwayne my questions tonight because I'll take him home, so I won't ask you now. But Josiah, I really enjoyed hearing your work tonight and your speculative fiction, your first story. I'm wondering what the kernel of that was. Was it a guy in a lawnmower? Was it a desolated town? Like, tell me about the inception of I'll Take It From Here.
Yeah, sure. I worked at a library at a really small college. This is probably 8 years ago, maybe. And this college was so small that I was the only evening staff. So I worked 5 to 10. And then I'd lock up, walk home at 10:15. And one night I'm just walking home and it's dark outside and I see what I think is a riding lawnmower with no one on it, just on one of these campus lawns. And I thought, what? And it kind of freaked me out a little bit, and the leaves were blowing. And I just thought, oh, what an interesting image. And then this phrase came to my head. These men came to town saying they were going to clean up the town, and they said it like a threat. And that's not a phrase that shows up in the story, but that's kind of the phrase that guided the spirit of it.
Any last questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, one more. Perfect.
Dwayne, when your book hits production onto Netflix, who would you like to be the actor for Belvedere and Montgomery?
Are you working with Netflix? Haven't thought much about that, to be honest. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I have any answer for that question. You have some suggestions?
Well, I'm trying to picture that, like, I don't sure if you described them. So is Belvedere quite burly?
Yeah, I would say so. You know the guy who was in the movie The Shape of Water? He's an American actor. Can't remember his name, but I really like the actor. And that guy could be Belvedere. I don't know, Montgomery, you know, is more like, Josiah could play him. So I don't know if Josiah's decided to take up a career in acting, but it would be a younger man and, a smart, level-headed, kind fellow, whoever that would be.
Crazy creature. Saving that part for me. So thank you all. Before we wrap up completely, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what is coming from Shadowpaw Press going forward. The next book coming out is a young adult fantasy novel called Broken Realm from Jenna Green, who's a Lethbridge author. That comes out in April. In May, I have Robert J. Sawyer's new novel, The Downloaded 2, Ghosts in the Machine. The Downloaded came out from Shadowpaw Press 2 years ago. He started life as audiobooks with, minor actors in it, like Brendan Fraser doing the narration. And I'm also bringing out a new edition of his book, The Oppenheimer Alternative, which is an alternate history of Robert Oppenheimer in the development of the atomic bomb. So that's out in May. And then come this fall, we have Sharon Butala's new novel, Struck in the Heart. That'll be coming out sometime this fall. And I will also be doing a Kickstarter for, there's a long-running speculative fiction magazine, On Spec, which went out of business, and they talked to me about taking over the brand. And so there's now going to be an On Spec anthology, assuming the Kickstarter works. It should be launching in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And that will come out this fall, and that will be, I have some good anchor authors in there, but it will be open to submissions. I just throw that out there. So I'm looking forward to doing that. That's this year for Shadowpaw Press. And then in the new year, I've got a new book from David Carpenter is coming. And I think I can say that I will take the sequel to The Laundryman, as you know, assuming I don't finish reading it and thinking, why, I should never have said that. It seems unlikely. So I think we will probably have but see, I brought out Dave Carpenter's book, Hello, and Dwayne's book, Theories of Everything, very close to each other. Was that, yeah, last year. It looks like that'll probably happen again next year. So see, I'm your go-to Saskatoon publisher these days. So thank everyone for coming, and please buy The Laundryman and Dwayne will sign it for you.